Hey everyone, today I want to talk about a toxic habit I think a lot of us do. It's something I know I've engaged in regularly throughout my life and am still struggling with, and I think it's super common, especially among women. But it's something that gets in our way, that makes life harder. And I think having this conversation, addressing it head on, could potentially help you, potentially help me. I just want to have the conversation. Also in the spirit of this channel partially being about self-empowerment and, I don't know, just building confidence. I hope that this can be helpful to you. And I'm going to start by giving an example in my own life of something that happened very recently. And it's kind of a tiny example, like it's really not that big of a deal. There are way more important examples than this one, but it just kind of illustrates what I'm talking about. This morning, I woke up and I was actually looking through some comments on my most recently uploaded YouTube video. First of all, I'm so grateful when anyone comments because I love the conversation and the dialogue we can have, and even seeing your thoughts, even if I don't always respond, I really do appreciate comments. I don't know, I posted this video, it was 10 things to declutter, but I also included a sponsorship with Merit Beauty and talked about their makeup while I was getting ready, while I was talking about 10 things to declutter. So it was a very multitasking video, maybe a little less focused and organized in that sense, but I felt like it was a nice compromise to still have it be on a topic that I was planning to shoot about anyway, and that's topical to my channel, the 10 things to declutter. Anyway, I got several negative comments on that video. Some of them were just kind of said very plainly and felt not the best to read, and some of them were written in a very kind, respectful way. But they basically were saying, I don't want to have to watch you put on your makeup throughout. Why is this entire video an ad? I don't like it. I just felt bad in that moment when I saw those negative comments, because honestly, I don't get that many negative comments, and if I do get negative comments, they're often like very ridiculously mean, and I can just very quickly ignore them, like commenting on my appearance or commenting in a way that just is truly kind of cruel. But some of these were kind of said very kindly, and clearly there were viewers that had watched numerous times, and honestly I think I felt bad because I kind of saw what they meant. Like, I do get that if you're here to watch a video about 10 things to declutter and you have to watch me put on makeup the entire time, it's kind of annoying. Like, as a YouTube watcher myself, that's the type of video that, yeah, maybe if a YouTuber does something out of the ordinary, it just kind of bothers me a little bit and I'm not as into the video. It made me feel bad, like I'm not producing the content that people want, that people like, and I don't know, I just had this like icky feeling inside. And even though I feel like I've moved so far past caring that much what people think of me, letting people down is something I really don't want to do. And it made me feel really bad. And so I kind of carried that with me through my morning, feeling a little icky. The feeling's still a little bit there, but I did at some point have to stop myself and say, why do you make YouTube content? Like, what is that really about for you? And ultimately, it's about expression. It's about creativity. It's about working on challenges myself, working through them, sharing my journey, and also having fun. It also has become a place where I can make some money to support the time that I put into YouTube. Now, granted, have I been paid really well for every hour that I've worked on YouTube? Absolutely not. A lot of it is just like a passion project or for fun, but I do like to do sponsors sometimes, and I thought I'd have fun with this one. And I did talk about the sponsor way more than I needed to. Part of it was that I love watching makeup videos, and it was like a weird way to kind of halfway do a makeup video here. And so I was excited about that, and I was like stoked about it. And then it seems like a lot of people didn't like it. I eventually was like, listen, Aylin, it's okay. If you enjoyed making that video and some people liked it, why not still have posted it? And also, even if no one liked it, it's the content that I want to be posting right now. It was fun. I'm gonna share that video. And I also thought that some of the concepts I talked about in the decluttering aspect of that video were helpful for me to talk through. And also, it is okay for some viewers to not like all of my videos. It is okay for some people to get annoyed with me. That's just living life. What's the alternative, that I don't post videos? Anyway, my point is, if there's a video you're not into, don't click on it. Or if you start watching it and you don't like it, you don't have to keep watching it. That being said, I do appreciate feedback. I don't know why this one kind of stuck with me more. I also know that a lot of those people were just trying to be helpful and that they had the best of intentions. But I'm more trying to focus here on my emotional response, the way I was like mentally beating myself up about it, the way I was putting myself down as a creator, thinking about how I need to restrict the creative things I might want to try in the future. And then I was like, no, I don't have to please everyone. And in fact, I can't possibly please everyone. And so that's what I want to talk about today, is this whole issue of people pleasing. People pleasing can play out in way bigger ways in our lives that can have really problematic consequences. We can end up living lives that aren't meaningful to us, that don't feel right. We can find ourselves in scary situations or just downright bad situations. I will say I don't want to like blame the victim here, because often the people who are people pleasing are kind of victims of the situation, and they are compelled to people please either through how they were socialized or the situation and expectations placed on them. But I do also think that if you are a people pleaser, if you're someone who is self-silencing in some way, it's good to be aware of it, because maybe we can do something about it to lessen it and to live more according to our own values and priorities, and just according to what we think is even more fun. I want to really quickly read to you part of this article that was in Time magazine about self-silencing. It was called "Self-Silencing is Making Women Sick." It was written by a writer and psychologist. "Be more disappointing is not a piece of advice most people would pay money to hear. But in my therapy office, it's often the most valuable guidance I can give. My clients are mostly women, and nearly all of them struggle with the fear of disappointing others. Our culture rewards women for being perpetually pleasant, self-sacrificing, and emotionally in control, and it can feel counterintuitive for my clients to say no or firmly assert their wants and needs. But my work is about helping them realize that their health might literally depend on it. Today, women account for almost 80% of autoimmune disease cases. They are at a higher risk of suffering from chronic pain, insomnia, fibromyalgia, long COVID, irritable bowel syndrome, and migraines, and are twice as likely as men to die after a heart attack. Women experience depression, anxiety, and PTSD at twice the rate of men and face a 9-fold higher prevalence of anorexia, the deadliest mental health disorder. Why is it that women are falling ill to these diseases at a rate so much higher than men? Such jarring disparities cannot be accounted for by genetic and hormonal factors alone. Psychosocial factors may play an important role as well. Specifically, it seems that the very virtues our culture rewards in women, agreeability, extreme selflessness, and suppression of anger, may predispose us to chronic illness and disease. I swear, I'll stop reading soon, but let me just read a little bit more. In the late 1980s, Harvard-trained psychologist Dana Jack identified a recurring theme among female patients suffering from depression, a tendency to self-silence defined as the propensity to engage in compulsive caretaking, pleasing the other, and inhibition of self-expression in relationships in an attempt to achieve intimacy and meet relational needs. Through longitudinal research, Jack found that this learned behavior, strongly rooted in gender norms, was linked to an increased risk of depression. Since then, considerable evidence has revealed that female self-silencing isn't just tied to psychological issues like depression and eating disorders, but also to physical illness. For instance, in March of 2022, a team of researchers at the University of Pittsburgh discovered that women of color who strongly agreed with statements like, "I rarely express my anger to those close to me," were 70% more likely to experience increased carotid atherosclerosis, a cardiovascular plaque associated with higher risk of heart attack. Other studies have connected self-silencing to irritable bowel syndrome, HIV, chronic fatigue syndrome, and cancer among women. And most jarringly, women's self-silencing has been also linked to higher risk of premature death. I do want to add the caveat that I think it's dangerous to take correlational research and to assume causality, and ultimately probably a lot of these studies are correlational, looking at connections between different factors. And so to say that people-pleasing or self-silencing causes these conditions, I think that is quite a stretch. I'm not saying that, that's for sure. But I do think there's something to be said about this connection between people-pleasing and reduction in happiness, in struggling with mental health potentially, and to potentially it having some kind of physical effects on the body, of putting stress, actual physical stress on the body that can make it maybe more likely that some of these conditions come to the surface. It makes sense if you're people pleasing, you're less likely to express trouble that you're having with something or seek help maybe for a symptom you're dealing with. So then maybe you don't get the help that you might need or that might have helped prevent your illness or whatever it is from getting worse. So I do think, just on a logical level, forget even the research for a second, if you're so focused on others and not focused on taking care of yourself or afraid to express the problems you're having, those problems could be exacerbated or get worse over time, and then that can make life harder. Often women are very socialized to people please and to make other people happy, when it really is a losing game because we can't make everyone happy. It's just impossible. And I think it can lead us to doing things or being in a situation where we feel trapped or we're not happy. It can make it harder to get out of abusive situations, or it can make people end up just living a life that they don't want to live. I can look into my past and think about how people pleasing probably, for example, led me down a path of pursuing a career that I wasn't truly happy in, because I felt like ultimately it made other people happy. And part of that was, even once I decided to go down that path, I felt like I had to sort of keep up appearances or follow through because people had taken the risk on me to support me on that journey. So more specifically, I got my PhD in clinical psychology and finished it, even though from day one, I was not fully happy with it. I loved studying psychology, understanding people, hearing people's stories, but I wasn't loving all aspects of the day-to-day work of being a researcher and of being a psychologist. And eventually I did switch careers, but I look back and I think about, sometimes I'm like, did I waste those years of my life pursuing something because I felt like it looked good to other people, because I felt like it made other people around me happy, because I felt like once they had accepted me into the program, I felt almost like a duty to complete it? I think it has affected my life in a lot of ways. You know, I also was diagnosed with MS a few years ago, and it still affects me every single day. I have symptoms all the time, even right now as I'm talking. I do wonder if I hadn't kind of held in so much stress in my life, like kind of just held in and internalized it to make sure other people were happy, if I had expressed it more and had not felt like always I need to do things by the book and I need to pick a path that is right, maybe I would have had less stress and maybe I wouldn't be in the exact situation I am with my MS today. And I'm not trying to blame myself, and I'm not trying to blame anyone in my life, because I really feel like this was kind of societal and self-inflicted. Like, my parents were very accepting and open of what I wanted in many ways. I think it was just society and the messages I was getting at school and who I felt I needed to be that contributed to a lot of this. And even now I struggle with my MS, like so often saying yes to things, doing things, pushing through when I feel really bad and my MS is getting worse in the moment, but I still just move forward with something, like going on a long walk with friends when I'm not feeling well or something like that, to people please when I'm quietly struggling, and that might have consequences for me later. So it's something that I want to think about on a deeper level. Am I living the life I want to live? And I think it even comes into like my new role as a mom and motherhood, and also having a career and working and wanting also to help financially in my family. Not to say that being a mom isn't actually helping financially, because being a mom is contributing hugely to keeping a family running and keeping them afloat. And there's a lot of labor and work involved in that. But I am just struggling with my new identity of like, how do I want to be spending my time? It's meaningful for me to be a mom. It's also meaningful for me to have a career, but then also I'm dealing with MS in the middle of it, and I don't know exactly how to juggle all these factors, and I don't know what the best path for me is. And I think it's actually a little bit harder for me to figure out what the best path for me is, because I have this chronic tendency to people please. And because of that, I'm just bad at figuring out what I want. I'm so focused so often on what other people want that it's hard for me to actually know what I want, because I actually do derive a lot of happiness and joy when I can make someone else happy. That's like part of what brings me joy. So then, you know what I mean? It's hard to figure out what is it that I want for me. And I think that's something I am not alone in dealing with. I think a lot of people deal with this. And before making this video, I wrote down just a few little notes of how people pleasing can lead you down a path maybe you don't want to go. For example, first of all, you might start to do what others want you to do and not what you want. And I think that's especially risky because what if you're wrong about what they want? A quick example I'll give of this, I remember I had this one supervisor for a practicum I did during grad school, basically someone to meet with weekly to talk through the therapy clients I had and to talk through how I could be getting better, that kind of thing. So basically he was my supervisor. And he one time said to me, Aylin, you're always agreeing with me. Like anytime I critique what you're doing in the therapy session that we're listening to a recording of, you always say, oh yeah, you're right, I shouldn't have done it that way, I'll try it this other way. You never push back on it, and I just think that's interesting. And anyway, I don't need to get into everything he said, but I basically got the vibe that he was like, our conversations in supervision meetings are basically less interesting because it's just me critiquing you and you just saying like, okay, yes sir, basically. So I was doing what I thought I was supposed to do. He is this extremely experienced, almost famous psychologist. Why would little old me disagree with him? You know what I mean? That was my mindset. And also, he as my supervisor had power over me. He would be someone who would give me recommendations for the next step in the process. And so I also needed him to like me on a selfish level. And then also I just wanted to be nice. I wanted to be respectful. He was my superior. I felt like I just needed to be like, yes, of course. Yes, I'm sorry I did that kind of vibe. And he was like, no, like we should have more of a back and forth. That was like a little wake up moment for me. Like, oh, sometimes what I think someone else wants from me isn't even actually what they want. Like, he would actually rather have a heated intellectual discussion and kind of have me challenge him than for me to just say, yes, sir. That being said, though, that still is me trying to please him if I change how I approach that. But I do think it's just a good example of sometimes you assume you know what someone else wants from you, and that is not always what they want. Another problem that I have on my list of situations that you can get into, sometimes people pleasing can lead you to do things you don't feel comfortable with or aren't a good idea for you for whatever reason. And ultimately, doing this can lead to resentment, burnout, trouble making decisions, and a loss of self. If you're always trying to please other people, and you only get joy from pleasing them, you start to lose sight of what you actually want and what's important to you, what you even like. I think back to when I was a kid, how much I wouldn't let myself pursue interests because I thought they were kind of weird or dorky or not cool, or I felt like they weren't, impressive or whatever. And how it's just kind of like in adulthood, I'm starting to explore more interests that are just fun for me. And I think that's really important, getting back in touch with what you actually like. I want this video to be helpful. This is something I'm working on. I think even just talking about it is helpful. It's helpful for me to talk about, to think through all this. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts. But I also want to just think for a second about how can we combat this feeling? How can we move past people pleasing? And so I wrote down a quick list, and the list is first, slowing down and asking yourself, what's in my own best interest? And I think this one is hard to do, especially when we've been socialized to be people pleasers and we've basically been celebrated or praised when we make other people happy. And so it's hard to disentangle ourselves from that as a huge part of our identity. And I'm not saying that we can never people please again, but I do think taking the time to, especially in big life decisions, but even in everyday ones, to question what is actually in my own best interest? What's the best outcome for me here? What's the best situation for me? And what do I actually want? And I think that's something that actually takes practice. The first time you do it, it might feel awkward. It might even feel like you're being selfish or self-absorbed. I know I've felt that way when I've tried to do this, but I think it's important. And the more you practice this, the better and faster you can get at it. A second one is taking time to think about your own values and preferences. Sometimes you need to reconnect with what you like, and sometimes I forget that. I so often cannot, for the life of me, pick out what to order in for dinner or what movie we're gonna watch or something like that, and I'll rely on my husband to pick it out. And I do think part of it is because there is a mental load aspect to this, and I'm actually grateful for him. Sometimes I'm like, please just pick for me. But I think also sometimes I'm so afraid of like picking something he won't like, and that makes me so unhappy that I just don't want to deal with it, and I'd rather know what he likes, and that'll be satisfying to me. And I do think some of that is just fine, but I also think that sometimes I should really think about, what do I want? What am I in the mood for? but also on a deeper level beyond what you eat for dinner, how you spend your time, what your career is, what your spirituality or religion is, or lack thereof, or what you want your life to be about. Those are big questions that sometimes we can answer by people pleasing and doing what we think others want us to do rather than what is meaningful or important to us. And sometimes we can forget what's meaningful and important for us, or maybe you've never even gotten really in touch with what you yourself want or believe. It's so important to just actually take specified time to sit down and say, what do I want? Just start creating space for that in your life, because if you don't know what you want, how will you get to where you're going? A third one is to practice saying no. And I like to think of this almost as like a social anxiety exposure. When I used to give therapy, I had to focus on treating anxiety for a while. And one of the best ways and most effective ways to treat anxiety is to do exposure therapy, where someone gradually exposes themselves to the thing that they are fearing in a very planful, controlled way. And I used to do exposures with people even where they would force themselves to like make a typo or a mistake in an email and send it to their boss, or say something a little bit not correct at work or in a social situation, as a way to practice being imperfect, practice making mistakes, living with that anxiety and discomfort, and ultimately coming out on the other side knowing, wow, it wasn't as bad as I thought. It was okay, I made the mistake. And also, I could handle that feeling. I could handle that anxiety. And the more you do it, the less anxiety you tend to feel. And so I like to think of saying no, not people pleasing, finding little tiny ways to practice that in your everyday life. I think that practice can lead to lowering the anxiety around letting people down, which I think fuels a lot of people pleasing, and just getting more comfortable with advocating for yourself and saying no and getting what you want and not just living based on what other people expect of you. Practice that, and the more you practice it, the better you will become. And then a final one, a fourth one I want to throw in there is to, where needed, to set boundaries. And I know this one is obvious. It could be a whole other video, and honestly, I'm getting kind of tired, so I might stop talking about this topic, but I just wanted to throw that out there too, is actually figuring out if there is an issue in my life where I'm saying yes too much and I'm people pleasing too much, I need to just explicitly set a boundary, and that might actually make it easier for me to say no. Anyway, I know this video is very chatty and rambly. I really threw it together a little bit last minute, inspired by my reaction to that video this morning, and also something I've been working on lately, trying to people please less, but I would love to hear from all of you. And I also just want to add one more thing. Again, I want to clarify, honestly, it wasn't like those negative comments on the other video bothered me that much. It was just something where I was kind of starting to beat myself up mentally about it, and I tried to stop myself. I do welcome honest feedback. Like, if I'm doing something that people don't like on this channel chronically, like, it would be good to be told. It's kind of like if you have food on the side of your mouth, I would want someone to tell me that. You know what I mean? Like, I appreciate feedback and I want to get better, and I want to get better also at accepting feedback and being okay with it, because that's also part of people pleasing, is struggling with taking criticism. So I want to take that criticism, and I want to hear from you and your honest thoughts. Anyway, that is enough of that, but tell me your thoughts on this topic. What do you deal with? How do you deal with it as far as people pleasing and self-silencing? I would love to hear more. Thank you so much for spending this little bit of time with me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.